Can you hear me now, David? I think that's the problem. Hold on. I just need to mute the other camera. Just 1 second. I'll be right with you. Okay. Hold on. I gotta be right back. Don't go away. Enjoy the view. Okay, I'm back, and you should be hearing me and enjoying the view. So what you're looking at right now is the view from my office here in Hong Kong. And I am sitting at the boardroom table, and if I just look up outside the window, this is exactly what I'm staring at, and thought it would give you a chance to see that. So you should be able to hear me now and also enjoy the view, but that's not why we're here. That's not what we're talking about. But we'll come back to that view a little bit later as interesting things happen and interesting things fly by. So I just thought I would do that little bit of an experiment there. Let's come back into our other topic here and just have a look at who is here. So hopefully the sound's been sorted out. Oh, we can still see the view. Great. That's amazing. We'll keep that one up there. Okay, we've got Lakshmi from Bangalore. Hi, Lakshmi. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. It's great to have you. And marvelous. And great, super. And then we have another person here saying hello for another LinkedIn user. So your name's not jumping up. And someone else who says we can hear you. I'm so glad you can hear me. Small technical issues this morning, but thanks for letting me know. Yep, Lakshmi, it really is a lovely view. It's a spectacular view here. We can't argue with that. And when we get into the evening, twilight hours or even sunrise on either side. So we've got two walls of this, almost two walls of this office building, our windows. So this is looking west, and from this vantage point, you'll get a spectacular sunset. And if you come in the morning and you look out the other window, you get a spectacular sunrise. So can't argue with that. Really wonderful. But let's get back to what we're here to talk about today, and that is virtual coaching and in-person coaching. And we've talked last week about the democratization of coaching. And I'm going to be going through here a presentations slide to talk a little bit about the, what's the follow-on conversation from the democratization of coaching. And to give you a little bit of background, last week we talked about how originally coaching was usually like several decades ago when coaching first emerged. And it actually first emerged in the first acknowledgement of coaching in university literature is actually 1937. And it does go back before then. Now, they didn't call it coaching, they called it a form of management intervention. That's how the literature describes it. But then Galway came out with a book called the Inner Game of Tennis, or the Inner Game. And I have that actually in front of me. So let me go through that, maybe not. But in 1960s and 70s, it started getting coined as executive coaching. And the earliest really kind of modern discussion of this in the university literature happened around 1937, when they were talking about management interventions in a coaching type of way. So we know that coaching works, but lately what's been happening is a massive technological revolution that we're all familiar with. The pandemic accelerated that at absolutely phenomenal pace. And over the past few decades, it's become well-established and widely used developmental intervention to coach people. With a strong body of research demonstrating the effectiveness of coaching, but almost all of the research traditionally looks at in-person coaching contexts, which is what we're going to talk about today, is flag up some of the research that I've been studying about the effectiveness of coaching, because where that research is coming from, what it's revealed over time, and where the gap is in future research. There's a couple of key themes that you're going to see as we walk through my slide presentation today. What's changed dramatically is remote work, digital platforms, and more recently, AI-supported approaches. But increasingly in these virtual environments, nobody is really studying. It's making coaching more accessible and scalable, but it also raises the issue of, is it still as effective in those different mediums? So does the way coaching get delivered or take place in a virtual versus in-person environment actually make a difference? Does it challenge its effectiveness? And more specifically, we do have robust research that companies using these mediums in a structured way in both coach and coachee, but they're not both in coach and coachee perspectives, which is one of the things to be mindful of. So the first thing I'm going to show you here is a definition of coaching. And let's just take a moment here to have a look at who's joined us. Geeta, welcome, Geeta. Thank you for joining us. And are you able to hold on, David? David, can you confirm that you're able to hear me right now? 11:08. I just want to make sure that you can hear me and that I'm not on mute. Yep. So Lakshmi, you should be able to hear me by now. Oh, you can, Charito, you can hear me. So Lakshmi, it must be on your end. Okay, good. Any problems with the sound, let me know and we can try to fix that. Okay, so the first thing is Stern in 2004 came up with a working definition of coaching. And one of the things that's important to do is to really understand, well, what exactly is executive coaching? So executive coaching is an experiential, individualized leadership development process that builds on a leaders or would-be leaders. So originally, executive coaching was only for leaders, and now it's for would-be leaders. And let me just check your message here. Yes, you can hear me. Okay, so we're good to go. So Lakshmi, if you still can't hear me, then unfortunately, it's on your end. Not to shirk responsibility, but looks like I'm working on my end. And so it's also executive coaching is also used for would-be leaders, very much as a tactical, even strategic intervention to develop future leaders, to help them grow their capabilities, to achieve professional organizational goals. It's conducted through one-on-one interactions, driven by evidence from multiple perspectives and based on mutual trust and perspective. So that chemistry is really, really important. And one thing that has come up in the research is the hybrid approach, that at some point, even if you're in a virtual environment, that you have a one-to-one in-person interaction to establish that trust or to reinforce that trust if the first time you meet is not in person, but it's actually virtual because of distance. So the key things that Stern developed as a working definition was that it was experiential and it was individualized, focused on leadership development, that there's mutual trust and respect between the coach and the coachee, and there's evidence from multiple perspectives that the end product, the results of the coaching, are actually working. And one of the things that's important to note about this is that any study and research that I'm doing, you've probably figured out the reason I'm talking about coaching so much lately is not only I am a coach and am involved a lot in coaching, but at the same time, I'm actually also doing a doctorate of executive coaching, and I'm about to hopefully going to launch the research within the next 4, 6, or 8 weeks. And so I'm polishing up and sharpening up my thinking, and I would love your feedback on all the things we're talking about today and in all the other different lives. But I do want to emphasize that, one of the Okay, let me just move on because that thought just temporarily passed me. So we have a working definition of executive coaching, practitioner focused. And one of the things about Stern is that he didn't take into consideration age, and he didn't take into consideration the medium. Everything was assumed back then that it was happening face to face. So there was no modality comparison in his research. But his research wasn't really empirical, it was more perspective. He was looking at the literature to get a working definition of executive coaching. But what came along next, not long after Stern's work, was a gent named Leadham. And Leadham worked in the UK. He had significant responsibility for, I believe he worked in human resources or talent development or learning and development in the training and development department with significant executive responsibility in, I believe it was the UK Postal Office, which at the time employed about 50,000 employees. And he came up with the Leadham's coaching benefits pyramid model, which has stood the test of time. And he studied business coaching benefits via literature. And so he did a big literature review. Obviously, he would need to do that. He looked at purchaser case studies, and he looked at coaching surveys. And he conducted a multi-dimensional study that combined literature review, a case study of procurement, people that worked within corporate procurement, and a large-scale national survey of coaches to develop his coaching benefits pyramid model. And that maps the foundation factors of, it maps into coach foundation factors that you would hear about in any coach training, such as coach skills, attributes, process, and environment, up through to the interpersonal benefits. And the interpersonal benefits for a coachee would be clarity of focus, confidence and motivation, and then the outer personal benefits and the business results focus on the benefits to the individual as a leader, and focus on the benefits of the organization. What results is the organization getting from the individual being coached? One thing I wanted to say earlier that vanished from my mind temporarily was that in the research that I'm doing, I'm focusing on all forms of coaches: executive coaches, business coaches, leadership coaches, life coaches, and starting to just recently decided that I'm going to include well-being and health coaches, specifically well-being coaches around people that are struggling with maybe resilience, work-life balance, and so they get a well-being coach to support them with that. What I'm not focusing on is sports coaching, which is interestingly where the coaching concept originally came from. Galway wrote his famous book in the 1960s, 70s about coaching and sports coaching, and then he translated that over into the organizational world. So I'm focusing on really the larger focus of executive coaching, life coaching, leadership coaching, and well-being coaching, but not so much sports coaching. So this is Leadham's coaching benefits pyramid model. And there are probably, from Leadham's time, there are maybe 3 different models that emerged in that decade of 2000, the 2000s, that have been similar to Leadham's, and that people will use if they're really trying to capture coaching effectiveness. Now, let me stop for a moment and just check in on some questions here. And there's a question from Jeffrey: what's your proxy for effectiveness in research, since that choice probably shapes the whole conclusion? I will come back to that question, Jeffrey, but it is an excellent question. And I like that a lot, because I went in and had quite a big scratch around. I've actually developed my methodology, and one of the things that's happened in my research is the pandemic turned my literature review upside down. So I've had to go back in to redo my literature review. So I feel like I'm doing the whole process twice, which is fine. So I haven't actually gone back and re-looked at my research methodology, but I am going to do that. I'm in the process of doing that right now. And your question the other day on LinkedIn was an excellent question, Jeff. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Let's move on here to the next question that we had. So Leadham's model is very, very effective and something for us to consider. But we do have parallels in, or something that I'll be using. Leadham is what I'll be using to measure the results. We do have parallels, though, in history, which is really, really, really fascinating. So actually, if you look back to the 1960s and 70s, speakerphones became more and more common in the business world. Speakerphones had actually been around in tech firms and NASA, for example, where you would, and the military, where you would expect speakerphones to first come online before they get commercialized. But in the 1960s and 70s, we saw a rise of speakerphone technology in businesses. And there were executive coaches out there in the corporate system and in the business world who embraced speakerphones enthusiastically and loved the new tool despite harsh criticism from traditionalists. So I called these executive coaches rebel or rogue executive coaches. And why did I do that? Is because they were quite, what would I say? They were quite, a lot of people felt that they were unconventional. And the coaches said that the speakerphone sessions actually removed in-person bias quite a bit. They were shocked actually when they recognized it was like an experience for them through executive coaching, and listening to coaches on the phone, on the speakerphones, they saw a whole other dimension of executive coaching and recognized that when they were with somebody, there was a certain amount of bias that they were bringing to the conversation, whether it was bias in terms of how the person sat, or did they always sit with their arms crossed because that's just the kind of person that they are, or how they had dressed that particular day, or the kinds of shoes that they were wearing, for example. They might disagree with those. And by eliminating physical presence and the chemistry equation, they could focus deeply on tone, inflection, vocal cues, and they saw a whole other side of executive coaching. It was revolutionary at the time, and critics argued that the coaching without seeing the client was impossible. But these earlier adopters proved that face-to-face coaching could work, that the biases clouded judgment, and the speakerphone, they claimed that the speakerphone created a safe, judgment-free space that focused purely on the authentic voice and the narrative. So that was interesting. Now, let me just check my notes on that, make sure I haven't missed anything there. So that historical aspect was really, really fascinating for me, because I think it's a bit of a parallel for people who, when Skype, for example, first came available, that's what I first used for coaching people virtually. I didn't ever really use the phone for coaching. It was Skype was the first main tool for one-on-one coaching. I did a lot of Skype coaching and started coaching via Skype as far back, actual coaching as far back as 2019. But I remember in the very early days of Microsoft Messenger, if you can remember that, officially Microsoft is we probably all saw the obituaries or MSN Messenger about 10 years ago or 12 years ago. I remember with MSN Messenger, you could go into a virtual conference call spontaneously. And I remember some friends and family members having technology issues with their computers. And MSN Messenger, you had an ability to take over the computer. And I used to teach some of my family members that were new in technology. I used to take over the computer for them remotely. They'd be in Canada, I'd be in Hong Kong. And I would help to instruct them on how to set something up on their computer or how to solve a problem. So that was a long time ago. That was as far back as 2004 or earlier. And in the late 1990s, MSN Messenger first had that tool. Then when I first started coaching, it was via Skype in 2019. And I think that some coaches, not a lot of coaches, but some coaches started using tools like Skype or Citrix's tool, GoToMeeting, and then Zoom came along and Teams came along. And before the pandemic, coaches were doing virtual coaching. And I think there's a parallel because some people felt, well, no, you can't do virtual coaching. You can't do virtual coaching. It's the same as trying to do telephone coaching through a speakerphone. It's not the same as being in person. But the pandemic hit us, and ICF research found that even though coaches were resisting virtual coaching, they were forced to adopt it out of the pandemic, out of necessity, from the pandemic, out of necessity. And that was what has probably had the biggest impact on driving executive coaching and other forms of life coaching, leadership coaching, well-being coaching, driving it online. So that was a big deal at the time. Now, what's coming up next is the technology acceptance model by Davis. So this happened in the late 1980s. And this is actually really, really interesting. And it seems intuitive. You would be kind of surprised because when you hear about this, it was intuitive, but a lot of people rejected his ideas. So basically, he developed the technology the acceptance model, showing that perceived usefulness and ease of use of drive of technology adoption actually would encourage people to adopt. So that's kind of basic change management. I think that we would all know that right now. Intuitively, we would all think, yes, if the technology is perceived as being useful and it's perceived as being easy to adopt, then people are more likely to adopt it. And that was effectively what he was saying out of the technology adoption model. So the key finding was if a tool is useful and easy, the adoption skyrockets. Coaches and coaches adopt virtual platforms faster if they see them as useful goals and easy to navigate. I think a lot of coaches have not seen virtual coaching as an avenue to achieving their goals, maybe in the beginning, and the pandemic maybe changed that. And then it's up to the technology being reliable on whether or not you're going to use it. The easier the technology is, obviously, the more you're going to use it. Now, he tested this over 2 studies with 152 users. He didn't do any age analysis, which Leadham also didn't do. Leadham in his analysis didn't do any age analysis, and Leadham's analysis was only in person. Back then, there was no discussion of virtual, and the same with Davis's research and his definition of executive coaching. So thus far, everything is based on in-person. 152 users is not a bad study, but there was no age analysis. And it was generally about information technology acceptance. He didn't really test out any coaching theories or coaching modalities. So then we move into the next. Let me stop for a moment and just check out here if we have got any comments coming in. If you have any comments, let me know. Happy to answer any questions you may have. So welcome, Jocelyn. Thank you for being here. And great to have you again. And also Rejoice, great to have you. Rejoice, it's the middle of the night. Thank you for being up in the middle of the night, but something tells me that somebody has got you up in the middle of the night and you just happen to be fortuitously joining us. I think it's 4 a.m. in Nigeria. Okay, let's move on in our discussion here. The next area of significant research was this individual or a collection of individuals, Kambara Karan, and he and his team surveyed executives and coaches on leadership changes that would come about from executive coaching programs. They studied both coach and coachee perspectives, and they had 114 executives, 42 coaches. So that's quite a large sample, not quite 200, but just almost there, halfway towards 200. There was no age analysis. It was about general executive coaching. It was not modality specific. It was a single organization program, and there was always the risk of self-report bias. So people were reporting in their perceptions of the effectiveness of the coaching. They widely established coaching as an effective developmental intervention, and they demonstrated that statistically through significant positive change in 5 areas, and those 5 areas were people management, relationships with managers, improved goal setting and prioritization, improved engagement and productivity, improved dialogue and communication. And so they confirmed that executive coaching was a very, very effective tool. 5 areas of statistically significant positive change. And the other thing is that there, as you can see here, the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, we start to see how the results of their study start to overlap onto Needham's study as well. And then we go on to the next individual here is Passmore and Fillory. So one of the things you're going to, if you research executive coaching, you're going to discover Passmore's name all over the place. Very interesting. This person must have dedicated their entire life to coaching research. And what Passmore, they clinically, and his team, and Passmore's team did, Fillory and Travis, in this particular study, what they studied, they did a big clinical review about a decade. They reviewed about a decade of coaching research. And as it is, coaching research is limited. There's a lot of coaching research in the education space, but a lot of that has to do with the teacher and the student. And there's a lot of coaching research in the healthcare space, but the dynamic there is practitioner to the patient or doctor to the nurse. Usually those sorts of dynamics. They don't really have relationships that would be on par with coach-coachee, the way you would find in an executive coaching program or life coaching program or well-being coaching program. A little bit different. And so as a result of that, in the research that I'm doing, I'm actually steering away from healthcare and steering away from education, because I want to just focus exclusively on that kind of organizational business commercial space and the coaching that's happening in there. But what these individuals did, Passmore and his team, is they critically reviewed a whole decade of coaching research. They highlighted inconsistent outcomes and measurement and the need for more rigorous studies. They looked at studies that had mixed perspectives, and there was, interestingly, in the studies that they conducted, there was no age analysis, which will be a factor in my research. Is age a moderating factor in the adoption of virtual versus in-person coaching? And so what they did identify, though, was that, and this was as recently as 2011, and then they replicated that again later. They did identify that many studies lacked methodological rigor and standardized measures. And so that was fascinating. And you can get a sense here, the inconsistent metrics, no standardized approach, ROI and behavioral change was inconsistent, and lack of self-awareness focus. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to use the Leadham model for measuring coaching effectiveness, is because his model, and there are 1 or 2 others, but he's one of the top 3 models that's regularly referenced when it comes to measuring coaching effectiveness. And when people are, even if they're not using his model, when they're describing coaching effectiveness, you can usually capture the effectiveness of that coaching in one of, or ineffectiveness, as it would be described in one of his 3 layers in his coaching model. So then we get into the next slide here, and the next area of research was Athanasopoulou and Dobson. Let's stick with Dobson. And what they looked at is they conducted the most extensive systematic review of executive coaching outcomes, and again emphasize methodological rigor and context consistency. They basically did a research review. 110 papers were reviewed, no age analysis. All the papers that they reviewed were from traditional face-to-face types of research with limited virtual discussion. And they observed that there was a lot of variability of rigor across the studies. And there was some reference to virtual versus in-person coaching, but not much. But that they then came back to their study in 2018 and did a following further study. So what this basically tells us is you can start to see a research gap emerging here. In the bottom right, medium, not a focus, no modality comparison. The bottom left, not from both the coach and coachee's perspectives. And we might ask ourselves, why is it important to get the coach's perspective? Well, I think part of that is because the relationship is so important. And if even if the coachee thinks that they're getting results, if the coach is uncomfortable, if the coach feels that they're not making a difference, or that something's not quite working well, if there's something out of alignment, that trust or that alignment is not there, the relationship's not there 100%, then even if the coachee is getting the results, the coach might be feeling compromised and not be optimal, might not be working at their optimum. So it is important actually to get a coach's perspective. Plus, the other thing to acknowledge is that coaching is a profession, and ICF and other universities that offer executive coaching programs, that's part of part of the point of doing an executive coaching program is because it is a profession. And if we're going to have it be as a profession, then we have to trust the model that the coaches are trained and the coaches understand how best to coach individuals. So that's why the coach's perspective is important. And they're coaching hundreds of people, presumably, once they have an established practice. And understanding their views on coaching hundreds of people would be just as important as understanding a coachee's views on the results that they're receiving from coaching. So that's why it's important. And Dobson and their team identified that there was limited comparisons of virtual versus face-to-face, some, but limited. So the emerging gaps that are popping up here, people have examined aspects of virtual or e-coaching adoption and coach perceptions, yet both remain limited in scope, and the sample size and the dual perspective measurement is small. Manual in 2022, small sample size, limited generalization ability, a lot of reliance on self-reported measures with potential bias and lack of long-term follow-up. And overall, you can see there's lack of a control group throughout a lot of these groups. And many recent coaching studies use modest samples. So you'll find a lot of them have done qualitative studies of 6, 10, 20, 25, 30, maybe up to 50 people, but by being from 50 to 150, you might have a sample that's quantitative, but it'll be a combination, maybe like a hybrid qualitative, quantitative. And this is an area to address. So moving forward then, there are a couple of other more research study happening here, and I have 19 more articles to go to. Not today, I only have 1 or 2 more to go through today. And let me just check here for comments. And if we have any more comments, just looking for any messages from you, David. And it looks like we don't have any comments at this particular time. Let me just check that. No. Okay, so these last 2 studies here, both by Mikulik and one by Passmore, they looked at, first of all, Mikulik and these 2 studies looked at, they found no significant differences in perceived coaching success across face-to-face, blended and online formats, which would be a hybrid approach, although they found what they call side effects were reported as slightly more prevalent in digital and blended formats. And what I can tell from the side effects that they're talking about is that if you don't have that one-to-one meeting that I talked about at the beginning of the live, if you don't have that one-to-one meeting to establish the chemistry and establish the trust, then the blended on hybrid approach or the online approach could be compromised. They don't really get into it, and they're a little bit ambiguous in how they describe it. They're basically saying, if virtual is available for you and it works for you, go ahead and do it. And if it's not available for you and it doesn't work for you, or if you have an option, then don't worry about it, because basically they're saying online formats are as effective and with greater accessibility for the long-term benefits of reducing travel costs, being more accessible, all the online tools that are available that you can still use just as effectively as if you're in person. They're saying go for it anyway. Those sorts of things can be managed. The side effects can be managed. But with both these Passmore, Mikulik, and Schmerli as well, the sample size was too small. They were talking sample sizes of 10 to 15. And this is, again, what the researchers are saying is they're saying, okay, how do we know based on 10 to 15 individuals that something's effective? And that's 25 people in a big, significantly produced study with a, they're Passmore's a top researcher and extremely well informed about executive coaching, but hard to say that make conclusions based on research that's 10 and a sample of 10 and 15. Charito's got an observation here. Let me just stop and take that and we'll have a look at it. In my opinion, virtual coaching for me is like you were talking to someone who wants to help us understand on some topics through hearing and reading only. Is emotional connection nor one of the greatest criteria of reaching out and connect. Shaking hands before and after coaching helps both sides to connect, starting with respect. Yeah, so what I've found, Charito, is that those sorts of rituals, let's call shaking hands a ritual. One of the things that's happened in virtual coaching is I have identified that people that rely heavily on virtual coaching establish rituals which are in lieu of a handshake. And you might find that in a virtual coaching session, and remember, when we're talking about virtual, we're talking about two humans talking together. We're not talking about AI coaching where you're interacting with an AI persona. We're talking about human to human. The only thing that's different is instead of face to face, you're actually human to human via some sort of virtual technology, a WhatsApp call, Zoom, some kind of conference, web conferencing facility. And the coaches that are doing that successfully are the ones that create some sort of ritual that's the equivalent of what you're talking about here of establishing that human connection and shaking hands. But what Mikulik and Passmore are saying here is that maybe that's one of the side effects that they're talking about, is that you don't get that shaking hands, human to human connection. But at the same time, they're saying despite that, it is still effective. So let's move on to my next slide here. And we're going to come back to full circle in a moment. So in this particular slide, let me blow it up for you here so you can see it in greater detail. We are seeing rapid growth of virtual coaching. It's accelerated into post-2020, past the pandemic, based on 2021 research. And the ICF documented that the proportion of coaches frequently or always using audio-video platforms doubled during the pandemic, with the majority believing that virtual delivery would remain elevated afterwards. It's interesting. They did several surveys throughout the pandemic, as did McKinsey. And it's very interesting to see that those surveys side by side. At the beginning of the pandemic, many coaches' perspective was that we would go back to the old way. And then by the middle to the end of the pandemic, coaches had sort of given up that view that we would stick with meet person to person when you can, but there is going to be a higher prevalence of sticking with the new virtual hybrid mode. And this is also reflected in some of the other research. Passmore and Fillory and Travis in 2021. Increased accessibility, flexibility, and scalability is one of the benefits. But on the bottom right here, you can see coaching delivery has changed faster than research has adapted, which is part of the reason why have chosen this area for research. Not only is it something that interests me, but at the same time, I can easily see, and the research bears it out, that coaching delivery has changed faster than the research has adapted. And there's a need to do a lot more research. And the research that I'm doing is absolutely not going to solve the world. I can tell right away that there are already going to be limitations to my research. And when you do a dissertation at the very end, you point to what's next, and I can already see what will be a weak aspect of my dissertation. And there's not much I can do about it right now other than to keep my research focused so it benefits a specific area and then opens up other areas. Lakshmi says here, humans are known to adapt. I have found deep connection and coaching thereafter, even with purely virtual programs. Intent and empathy does carry through as long as it is with video on. Yeah, I agree with that, Lakshmi. I think there's a lot that's emerging here. One of the things I was going to mention earlier was that one of the tools that I use can measure sentiment does what's called sentiment analysis, which is not 100% the same as measuring empathy, but it does get pretty close to measuring energy. And I can tell what the energy is like in a coaching call. And I let my coachees know when I'm using that tool, and often will share with them throughout the call. Or if you're in a coaching call and you see a coach's face drop in person, or their arms cross or their legs cross as if they're going into a defensive posture, sentiment analysis will pick that up in their face. And the if you're in that in person, you would often stop and ask questions based on the observations you're making, and you might reveal why you're asking those questions, because that helps to hold up a mirror. And you could do this in the sentiment analysis. I do the same thing. I'll say, okay, well, we dropped to a 64 here. How are you feeling? What's going on? We're not at 80 where we're normally at. And some coaches see it as a bit of a game to stay up there and energized. Hey, Jackie, welcome. Great to see you. Thanks for being here and following your journey, Jackie, and just think you have extraordinary courage. So we're really championing for you, and I'm telling your story to a lot of people about just how incredible a journey you've been on. If you want to know more about that journey, you can go to Jackie's LinkedIn or Facebook, and she will share all about it with you. I won't share it here. I'll let Jackie tell her story because she does that extremely well. And so this is an area that we need to focus on, is the more research and the really to understand that coaching delivery has changed faster than the research has adapted, and that's problematic in some cases. Some other research that came out that was quite interesting is Hallowell, Mitchell, and Boyle. They tested how coaches improve leader effectiveness via authentic change behaviors and self-efficacy. Primarily, this was coachee and leader, as in organizational perspective driven, with multi-source ratings, reasonable size sample, 70 organizational leaders, no age analysis. It was about general leadership coaching, and there was no feedback from the coaches, and there was no comparison of modality. So this particular study was silent on whether the coaching was happening virtual or in person. And I assume that it was happening in person. So again, limitations there, but medium was not a focus, and the coaches did not feedback on that. So I'm hoping that I'm going to answer some of these questions in my research. But the one thing that Hallowell, Mitch, and Boyle did do that was really helpful is that let me just make sure I'm on the right slide here. Yeah, one thing that they did do that was helpful was the model that they used. So the model that they used, they focused on coaching enhances leader effectiveness, increases authentic leadership behavior, builds self-efficacy and change-oriented rules, produces measurable gains aligning with inner to outer benefits model. So basically, what they did was they used Leadham's coaching benefits pyramid model when they did their sample of 70 leaders. So even though they did not get any coaches' perspectives through the lens of the coaching benefits pyramid model, they did use that model to measure effectiveness, which is significant. And what that also tells me, because I was worried that Leadham came up with his model in 2005. So then I was researching, okay, who else has used Leadham's model in recent years, especially post-pandemic. And this study, despite its limitations, is quite robust compared to many other studies. And they used Leadham's model. So that made me feel much, much better and convinced me that I should stick with that particular model. Another thing that's very popular in coaching theory, when you do formal coaching training, is that you will typically come upon Bandura's social cognitive theory. And the core idea of his theory, or Bandura's social cognitive theory, is that self-efficacy and observational learning drive behavioral change. And it's a belief that that you have a belief in your capabilities, that you have a determined task approach, that you have determined effort, that you have persistence, So his social cognitive theory has high self-efficacy. It advocates for high self-efficacy, and that high self-efficacy leads to greater motivation and resilience. And that plugs directly into Bandura's self-efficacy, or into Leadham's emphasis on interpersonal benefits. Leadham would say that once you achieve interpersonal benefits of self-awareness, confidence, and emotional resilience, that seems to be the tipping point of a person being able to create the outer personal benefits, and then the organizational passes on to the organizational benefits and the results. And so those two significant pieces of research and literature that plug directly into Leadham's coaching model. And that's what has kept me focused on using Leadham down the road. So we got we have a quick comment here from Jocelyn. Thanks, Jocelyn, for your comment. Yes, virtual coaching is amazing alternative. 2 weeks ago, I had a virtual session, then an in-person. There's a big difference from a humanistic perspective. In-person draws more energy and engagement. At time with virtual, there are distractions. True, there are distractions, but virtual can be effective. And there are ways, those little rituals that I talked about, and there are tools, Jocelyn, that can enhance that in-person situation. And sentiment analysis is one of the things that you can do. And Jackie says here, thank you, Charles, appreciate you so much. Well, we appreciate you, Jackie. You are just a force to be reckoned with. I mean that in an empathetic force to be reckoned with. Empathy with courage, I think, is what you see when you look up empathy and courage in the dictionary. You find Jackie. Go have a look at her LinkedIn and find out what her story has been in the last 6 to 8 weeks. Quite incredible. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, Jocelyn. Jackie is the trooper. Yeah, the model for all of us to follow. So where does this lead us then, friends? This takes us into research gaps in virtual in-person coaching. So the absence of direct structured comparison of virtual versus in-person coaching effectiveness. There have been studies where they've coached them. They have undertaken those studies where they've looked at the two, but there's always some kind of limitation in the analysis. There's limited dual perspective. So it's very difficult to find research where they look at both the coach and the coachee, dyad, that kind of model, in existing studies, with most research primarily looking at one stakeholder view. And I just want to qualify here that there's a lot of surveys that are done. So the ICF is excellent source of surveys. There are other surveys that are taking place that are terrific for understanding the growth of the industry, how people are viewing virtual versus in-person coaching differently, but they're not necessarily doing an academic level rigorous survey. Like Bandura's cognitive theory is something that's well researched and well accepted in the psychology field. And most counselors and coaches, if you get through that type of coaching at some point, are going to encounter Bandura. And when you do and you read the research, that things make a lot of sense. So that's different type of research from a survey that is sent out and then processed. Those surveys are still very, very, very valuable. And I'll be using some of those stats in my research as well to supplement the rigorous academic research. But in everything I've been talking about today is with all due respect to the surveys, but the surveys are not everything. And then the other last item, number 3 here, is the insufficient examination of age generational factors as a potential moderator of coaching modality, coaching medium, and the effectiveness and the outcomes. And what I mean by that is we have Gen Z pouring into the workforce more and more, and every year there are going to be more and more of them. So the future of Gen Z coaching is going to be, or the future of coaching is actually ultimately going to benefit Gen Z and Alpha generation. And we know that Gen Z are a digital generation. The question is, do they have a preference for virtual coaching? And I can tell you anecdotally, out of just being a coach that's available online and people that contact me through LinkedIn or through platforms such as Fiverr and want to get some coaching, Usually they're looking for life or leadership coaching. Sometimes they're looking for career coaching because they've got a relational problem. And they come to me as an HR practitioner to help them solve that problem from a legal perspective. And there are some people who come to me just purely for pure play executive coaching. But what's interesting about what I've noticed about the Gen Z is that when they contact me on Fiverr, for example, they expect that we're going to do it by text, or actually we're going to do it on the Fiverr's messaging platform. And I'm thinking, okay, well, we're supposed to set up an appointment for a Zoom call here. So the younger generation, some of them are expecting coaching by text, not even by virtual. And that's one of the things that my research will uncover is, do the different generations relate differently to virtual versus in-person coaching, or have a preference for different types of coaching? Interestingly enough, when the dot-com boom came through and we went through the lead up to AI in the last several decades, a lot of people that were doing generational analysis came up with what they called Generation V. And Generation V was any age group that were adopting technology at an advanced pace. So they would be considered early adopters, regardless of age. So they were Generation V. So there will probably be Generation V, because lots of people will be using virtual coaching, and despite the age. So those are the research gaps going forward. And where does that put us? How has this got implications for you, practical tips for you to keep in mind as you go forward? So for coaches, you need to be deliberate about contracting, about what you're going to use, and explicitly discuss with your coachee the elements of the relationship and the process may feel different online, and how comfortable they are with online versus virtual coaching. And agree on how you will notice and adjust to the differences between personal and in-person coaching. Are you going to have in-person only? Are you going to have a hybrid? Are you going to have virtual only? And how are you going to adjust for that? And I would say a practical tip is, at the start of a virtual engagement, ask the client what helps them feel most present and focused on screen, and figure out, to Charito's question earlier, or comment earlier, figure out what is that ritual that would be the equivalent of handshaking that starts to establish that warmth and that trust and that relational aspect that is so important in the coaching world. And then for organizations and those who are commissioning coaching, don't assume modality is neutral. When you're evaluating providers for programs, ask how effectiveness is measured, and especially across different delivery modes. The one thing about online delivery and virtual coaching, depending on the tool that you're using, it's a lot easier to measure the effectiveness of a coaching session. Now, the individual might be reluctant to actually answer a poll on Zoom because you're going to get immediate direct feedback, but there are ways around that. So for example, a lot of gig economy, Uber, for example, on Uber, my understanding is that your rating on Uber is withheld for 14 days. And then after 14 days, it's released anonymously for that particular rider, who meanwhile will have done presumably another couple hundred trips. So the rider, the Uber driver, is never able to actually pinpoint you. So polling is an option to get immediate feedback on coaching, but it doesn't answer, if you have some difficult feedback to give to your coach, it doesn't solve that problem. But ensure both the coach and the coachee perspectives are there whenever you are measuring the effectiveness of coaching for organizations. And a practical tip is to include a simple dual perspective check-in at midpoint and end of coaching assignments to measure or just to check in on how the coaching is going. And for individual clients, your preference and your quality of the work and the quality of the alliance and how the alliance works is what matters the most. And I think that's probably true for everybody. But in some organizations, they might say, hey, we're going with BetterUp and we're going to have a hybrid model. You're going to get coached once a month, and every 2 weeks, you're going to have access to an AI tool that will give you support and augmented AI support for that coaching. So then you don't have much of a choice. But for individual clients, you do have a choice. And if something feels missing in the virtual format, then name it early. Be bold about that. And a practical tip is after the first 2 sessions, reflect on whether together what's working, what's not working, challenge and support if you feel something is or is not sufficient, and raise it with your coach if you feel that something, if they're not getting something done for you or they don't feel something is sufficient. So a couple of comments coming in here. Jackie says, I can't imagine coaching via text until it is a quick update, special need that comes up. I agree with you, Jackie. I've never coached via text. I have, to your point about quick updates, special need, I do have coachees who contact me via WhatsApp or text. They have a particular question, and you might have a 5-minute interaction, but that's different from something going on for an hour. And Jocelyn says, informative slide. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And then on behalf of Gen Z's, text coaching isn't that bad, or probably a voice note. Advantage is we can read or replay content. Yes, absolutely, definitely. So Rejoice, my question would be, what is your experience with text coaching or voice notes, and how long has that coaching, how long would a coaching session take place? Does it take place over several days because you're exchanging 3 or 4 messages a day back and forth, or you have a dedicated 1 hour or half an hour when you're exchanging text messages back and forth? And I have had experiences like that on Fiverr, which have been exploratory, but never actually formal coaching like that. And voice notes are definitely possible, but it's hard to read a person. I think maybe listening to a voice note would be a little bit different from actually listening to what a person is saying in person or on a Zoom call, for example. But I'd be interested to know what your answers to those questions are, Rejoice. And that, I believe, brings us to the end of my presentation for today, and I hope that that has been useful for you. And while we're at it, let's just go back to, as we close out the session today, Nigel. Oh, thank you, Nigel. Great to see you. Got to go. Great research. Thanks for sharing details. You're most welcome, Nigel. More to come. Stay tuned. But before, let's have a quick look here at Hong Kong Harbor. So this is, Jackie, you missed this earlier, and anybody else joining a little bit late. This is the view from my office. You can see all the ferries going by. The large ferries are heading to Macau, and the smaller boats will be going to the outlying islands. The harbor at the bottom of this picture, or not the harbor, this is Victoria Harbor. The land at the bottom of the picture is Hong Kong Island, and across the water, across Victoria Harbor, is Kowloon. The cars that are going around a curve there at the bottom are cars going into the Western Cross Harbor Tunnel. And what's interesting is that I got to Hong Kong in 1996, and the Cross Harbor Tunnel was not that old. They only had one tunnel at the time. The traffic in and out of it was appalling. And it's very interesting to hear the history of how the tunnels have changed the fabric of Hong Kong and opened up perspectives and attitudes on Hong Kong. So thought you might enjoy this particular view. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. And I will see you all next week. This is Hong Kong over and out. I think what I'm going to do for the time being is just leave this up so that you can have a view of Hong Kong Harbor for the next little while, and then I will sign off when it's time for me to go. So that's me over and out, and leaving the Hong Kong Harbor up for you to watch. Thanks for joining us. Come back next week for more great stuff from Horizon X. Thank you.